Good morning! We are about to present this qualitative research entitled Recovery Plans of Philippine Airline Industry Amidst COVID-19 Pandemic, the Case of Philippine Airlines. I am Doris Joy R. Cuaresma, and I will be discussing about the background and the objectives of the study as well as the statement of the problem. The background of the study. The COVID-19 pandemic was felt around the world, and one of the most affected is the tourism industry, since this industry mostly involves travel or movement of people, and a lot of countries closed their borders to prevent the spread of the COVID-19 virus. The importance of airlines is indisputable. It has provided the advantage of modern travel, which establish fast, unproblematic, and comfortable journey to tourists, especially on distant destinations. The airline industry is a key enabler of many other economic activities as well, since it creates a lot of jobs and generates millions of revenue. It is also among the first industries that were affected by the pandemic because the virus is contagious. Thus, airline companies were obliged to act and make great adjustments due to the impact of the pandemic to their operations. The airlines around the world were all severely hit since the government won't allow the people to go out or limit their movement for essential purposes only. There were small number of passengers or no passengers at all. Philippine Airlines, which is the flag carrier of the Philippines, was definitely impaired as they had to respond and adapt to challenges brought by the pandemic and reorganize the structure of the management as well as the products and services for the company to still serve the passengers and be functional in the safest way possible. Philippine Airlines had many factors to consider for the company to keep on functioning, such as the passengers, employees, the management, and the government. Let's proceed to the objectives of the study. The researchers aim that this study make a significant contribution to the tourism industry as well as other academic scholars. Thus, the researchers came up with the following objectives. The first objective is to identify the implications or problems faced by the Philippine Airlines as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and to determine how these implications affected their normal operations. The second objective is to present available information to the Philippine airline industry regarding the operational strategic plans of the country's flag carrier towards its recovery during the COVID-19 pandemic. The last objective is to serve as a fundamental basis for future researchers for them to have a groundwork on how airlines cope up during the pandemic in the Philippine setting. Statement of the problem. This study sought to analyze the relationship of the COVID-19 pandemic to the operations of the Philippine Airlines, and the researchers sought to answer the following questions. First, what challenges were experienced by Philippine Airlines during the COVID-19 pandemic? Second, how do these challenges affect their operations? Third, what strategies were implemented by Philippine Airlines to address these challenges? And last, what are the recovery plans of the Philippine Airlines?
I am Allesandrina Joaquin Vens Legtan, one of the researchers, and I will be discussing the study's conceptual framework. For the conceptual framework of this study, since this research is under critical instance case study, the framework illustrates the cause and effect relationship of the COVID-19 pandemic to the recovery plans of the Philippine Airlines. Different variables were recognized by the researchers that affects the Philippine Airlines operations, in which is to be analyzed through the answers of the company's key informants. The variables of this study could be seen as it is highlighted in the yellow boxes on your screens. The first variable would be the challenges brought by the COVID-19 pandemic in the airline operations. Next, the implications of these challenges in the airline services. And lastly, the variable would be the strategies implemented by the airline in response to the adjustment or changes that the airline needs to follow or to adapt to. These challenges correlate with each other to formulate the recovery plans on the operation services of the Philippine Airlines in their ground service, in-flight services, and even to their cargo services. Now moving forward to the methodology of this study for the research design. This is a case study research which holistically describes, investigates, and analyzes certain events or occurrences to have a more in-depth understanding to the specific event. Therefore, the study's main focus is on one firm, which is the country's flag carrier, which is the Philippine Airlines. Specifically, this research is a critical instance case study that is used to know the cause and consequences of a certain event and to also examine the different sources to come up with a statement. As mentioned earlier in the conceptual framework of this study, this method is composed of variables that describes the adjusted operational services of the Philippine Airlines and could also be regarded as the cause and effect of the certain event, which is the COVID-19 pandemic. For the sampling technique, the chosen procedure for this study is purposive sampling. The respondents of the chosen study are the operation managers and officers working under the commercial operations of Philippine Airlines and PAL Express. The researchers believe that their insights and expertise are relevant to the topic. Moreover, the articles will be used as reference for the data generation, which are the locally published from March 2020 to the present. For the description of the instruments, the interview questionnaire was the major instrument that was used in the study. The questionnaire that was used is designed to obtain information regarding the challenges that were experienced and affect the operations of the Philippine Airlines. Open-ended questions were used to give to the respondents the opportunity to give their responses and opinions. For the statistical treatment of data, the researchers will use data generation. It is to fully understand the effect of COVID-19 on Philippine Airlines and its strategy and recovery plans that is being formulated amidst the lockdown. This refers to the methods of the researchers to use from a sample data source in the qualitative data. Thus, the gathering of the additional information is done through the analysis of articles, documents, and studies, together with the assessment of the responses from the interviewees, which are the airline operation managers and ground officers. At the end of it, by analyzing the results of the data and content being gathered, the researchers can come up with accurate information to state the strategic and recovery plans of Philippine Airlines. The best practices of Philippine Airlines is also included at the end of the study in comparison to other international flag carriers.
I am Milen Pagulayan, and I will be discussing the results of our study. Here are the data that we have gathered from our respondents from the Philippine Airlines. First is about the challenges experienced by the airline company during the COVID-19 pandemic. First, the dominance of restrictions and regulations set by the Interagency Task Force or the IATF and the local government units or the LGUs. The airlines has to adapt to the rapidly changing policies, advisories, and protocols which affected the flight schedules. If the airline failed to follow the directives, the airlines could be sued or required to pay fines or penalties because these directives are for the safety of the passengers as well as the employees. The restrictions and regulations implemented by the IATF and LGU is the first challenge that was experienced by the airline company. Subsequently, a chain of 3 challenges had arisen in the airline company. The 3 chains of challenges are: first, the drastic decrease of local and international flights. Philippine Airlines currently operates less than 30% of its normal pre-COVID-19 number of weekly flights. The most noticeable change in the cargo operation of the airline is the increase in the demand of service such as speed transfer of essentials needed such as medical supplies, equipment, and vaccines. Second to the chain is the decrease in overall revenue. The airline has been losing nearly $1 billion since the suspension of the flight operations last March 2020. Aside from allowing only essential travelers to travel, most tourist destinations are closed and leisure activities came to halt. Third is laying off airlines employees. The retrenchment program of the airline company had caused the airline to lay off 30% of its working force. This is one of the most difficult challenges that the airline has to address, as this resulted to emotional distress to the employees who were retained because some of the employees who were retrenched were like a family to them, and some have been colleagues for several years. Next challenge experienced by the airline company is the passengers' discouragement to travel that was caused by strict travel restrictions and added expenses in travel, such as the RT-PCR test results. For the passenger-related challenges that the airline company has to deal with is making the passengers understand the uncontrolled changes and conflicts to the flights and difficulty of the passengers to adhere to the implemented safety measures. With the uncontrollable surge of the pandemic, the IATF and LGUs continuously monitor the cases and may implement new protocols anytime, which can cause confusion to the passengers. And that is why, most of the time, the passengers blame the employees for the changes. Next is the limited to restrained service. Minimal interaction of the passenger and the crew as much as possible. The service of the cabin crew is now limited and different than before because of the risk of the COVID-19 virus. With the basic COVID-19 protocols, employees as much as possible are not allowed or advised to have lesser contact, which means the cabin crews cannot talk much or communicate and get close to the passengers and even to their colleagues for a long period of time. And for the safety of all passengers and employees, all food and beverage should be sealed. For the internal organizational challenge of the airline company, the first challenge is laying off 30% of the Philippine Airlines employees, which is equivalent to 2,300 individuals that were laid off by following a comprehensive system-wide review process. The comprehensive system-wide retrenchment means that Philippine Airlines, as the main airline, and Philippine Airlines Express, as the subsidiary airline that is both owned by Philippine Airlines Holdings Incorporated, has implemented retrenchment as part of their strategy or recovery initiative. The following things are considered in the review process for retrenchment are: first, voluntary resignation, which means the longest year of service that was included in the retrenchment is 19 years of service in Philippine Airlines. The longest year of service that was included in the involuntary retrenchment is 18 years of service in the Philippine Airlines. Next consideration is the seniority and performance evaluation. The key informant even mentioned that some employees were retrenched because of the lacking performance of service they execute to the passengers. That in cases of flight attendants, low performers could be included in the retrenchment if they exhibit such things as displaying indolence in flying or laziness in their service, when employees are getting tired and being unhappy in their service. Frequent absenters are also called off, and definitely the flight attendants that are being complained frequently due to the attitude of being snobbish or short-tempered. It has been an extremely difficult and painful decision to cut off the airline's employees. As mentioned by our key informant, it has been one of the most painful decisions to make and see your colleagues leaving. Therefore, the retrenchment had caused emotional distress not just to the laid-off employees but also to the colleagues who were retained as well. The pain of laying off employees that have been working for years at the company comes with a price. However, Philippine Airlines made sure that all retrenched employees will be assisted with employability initiatives to help ease the transition. Also, once the pandemic is over and when the company started needing more manpower, the retrenched employees will be recalled again for job application subject to their previous job performance. Another consideration for retrenchment is the nature of work. The stories shared by the key informants show that comprehensive system-wide retrenchment process of the Philippine Airlines and Philippine Airlines Express has done objectively. The performance was the key indicator whether an employee will be called off, regardless of their seniority. Another internal operational challenge that the airline faced during the pandemic is fake COVID test results submitted by the passengers that lead to flight disruptions. Philippine Airlines has to be strict in checking the reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction or the RT-PCR result that the passengers submit, as passengers tend to tamper or present fake documents to the counter just to pass the travel requirements and be allowed to board the aircraft. Next, pilots and cabin crews vaccination is scheduled in order to avoid the risk of being contaminated by the virus. Employees cannot be vaccinated altogether at once. They are divided into batches as employees still need to attend to the passengers. For the next discussion of results, it is about the operational implication of challenges experienced by the airline. First is the halted flight operations. The airline's initial response to the COVID-19 pandemic is to stop the operations, stop flying aircrafts, and put some employees on leave. The airline cannot compromise the health and safety of the employees and the passengers. Moreover, the skeletal workforce has been implemented. There have been rotational schedules of who will report on the office and who will be in work from home setup. It is implemented for the convenience of the employees to work inside their homes, safe and away from the risk of the COVID virus. Another operational implication is strictly implementing the health and safety protocols, which includes adding new monitoring and scanning equipment, sanitary and disinfection amenities such as soap, water, alcohol, and sanitizers across the airport, acrylic protective barrier in the check-in counters, and guides for social distancing. Airline also provides PPEs or personal protective equipment for the crew. Also includes the UPK or Universal Protective Kit, which is a container that only has N95 masks in it. Lastly, the HEPA filters or the high-grade efficiency particulate air filter, which has been installed and used even before COVID-19 pandemic in all aircrafts in order to assure the safety and sanitation of the aircraft. Next is the modified and new routings. Philippine Airlines has been creating and finding new routes that are frequently taken by the passengers, and the airline is not focusing much on the routes taken less by the majority of the passengers. In short, the airline is more focused on cutting down the non-essential expenses and is focusing on allocating the airline's expenses on the essential or profitable flights and services. Next, new policies implemented for Philippine Airlines and Philippine Airlines Express employees, in which they will be undergoing swab tests every 2 weeks to ensure that all cabin crews, pilots, and ground attendants are safe, healthy, and free from the virus, so we could deliver safe and quality service for the passengers. Work from home setup is also implemented for some ground employees. The airline has procured vaccines for the initiative that the employees to be vaccinated. When an employee tested positive of the COVID virus, the employees will be under the monitoring of the company, or called the CUM or crew under monitoring. For the new policies implemented for Philippine Airlines and Philippine Airlines Express passengers, in order to be fully safe, the Philippine Airlines requires passengers a negative swab test result and submit the travel documents and clearances needed for the passengers to be allowed in boarding. The airline makes sure that this scanning procedure is done thoroughly in order not to make a mistake in passing a COVID positive case within the board. There were also contact tracing forms and e-forms provided. Next to be discussed is the strategies implemented by the airline company to address operational challenges. The data gathered from the respondents are: first, the first strategy that the airline applied is to have empathy towards the passengers and understand the complaints and respond respectfully. The airline makes sure that they are listening to the opinions of the passengers and address passenger concerns with care. This is to keep the relationship between the company, employees, and the passengers. With the Philippine Airlines goal in mind, having empathy towards the passengers only proves that the airline company did not deviate from these core values. Philippine Airlines also implemented a batch system with its employees. This is the airline's way of having reserve employees if ever, just in case some crew encountered COVID positive passengers, they would not be able to fly for the next 14 days. The airline makes it as a strategy to let employees take turns to their work schedule for a reason that it is to balance their work life. Other employees will be on duty while the other team will make a rest and vice versa. This is also the company's strategy to prevent employees from being easily contaminated with the virus. The airline also offers and is about to offer new products such as neighborless seats for the passengers who want extra safety and offering of new routings to generate more revenue and compensate for the previous losses of the company. Another is that the company increases efforts in advertisement of safety, thorough study of proper utilization of resources, such as the one-stop shop in partnership with the Toxicare Molecular Laboratory Facility to have one-stop shop testing facility for the passengers who fails to provide medical documents, and intensifying cargo services, which is very in demand nowadays. Next, the company examines the effectiveness of these strategies by passenger feedback and the score of the airline in Qualtrics, return of investment in the company, and by looking at their manpower. In order to confirm the effectivity of the strategies in the airline company implemented, Philippine Airlines conducts passenger feedback and the score of the airline in Qualtrics, in which guided by scoring Pulse score of 70 to 75 via Qualtrics. With 4.2 out of 5.0 rating, Philippine Airlines is included on the list as the 9th safest carriers during COVID-19 via VDEC. For the recovery plans of the airline company, the researchers discovered in the recovery plans are the immediate plans. However, for the long-range plan in recovery and even after the COVID plan is still being finalized at the moment. The company currently focuses on continuous research, cost control, and increasing revenue by improving the company's products such as the one-stop shop swab test facility and studying for more new routings. The airline also obtained plans from the IATA, ICAO, and ISO and either follow it or further improves these ideas that would perfectly fit in the Philippine setup. When it comes to the implication of nationwide vaccination to airline operations such as commercial flights, the airline will still be following what the IATF and LGUs implements. Philippine Airlines makes sure that the strategies and recovery plans are in line to the international standards guided by the whole tourism and aviation industry.
I am Celine Sunga and I'll be discussing the conclusion and recommendation section. For the first conclusion, the restrictions due to COVID-19 resulted to global traffic and it greatly affected the operations of the airlines. Travel bans and quarantine measures resulted to cancellation of flights and lack of passengers. The commercial flight services of the Philippine Airlines have dramatically decreased, and one of the strategies implemented by the Philippine Airlines is by laying off 30% of their total manpower by a system-wide comprehensive retrenchment. However, the demand for cargo services has been increasing and adds up to the company's revenue. The company's utilization of resources and focusing on the essential operations, the airline company was able to survive the declining phase of the industry. Second, the initial response of the airline company on the internal and external implication of the pandemic was immediately drafted and implemented in order to still serve the airline passengers while being able to control the challenges brought by the pandemic. Policies were implemented for Philippine airline employees and airline passengers respectively, and both sides of the employees and passengers positively adhered to the imposed guidelines. On the other hand, those who are not following the policies will face the consequences based on the law imposed by the airline and the government. Third, The Philippine Airlines formulated strategies that are focused on the passengers, the employees, and the whole company operations. The strategies include procurement of necessary medical supplies such as personal protective equipment, face masks, and acrylic barriers, as well as putting up sanitation areas. Additionally, proper utilization of the company resources such as cost reduction on non-essential employees and facilities are also done. Philippine Airlines also created new products as well as intensified their attention to existing services such as cargo services to gain revenue and profits for the company. All of these things are measures done to prevent bankruptcy or closure of the country's flag carrier. Fourth, the recovery plans of the Philippine Airlines are yet to be disseminated to the majority of the public and to the tourism industry. The company has come up with plans such as research regarding new routings and other possible products to offer. Cost control and benchmarking is also done by the company's management for strategies and innovations. Vaccination of employees is also part of the recovery plans for more efficient operations. And all the policies that the airline implements are in accordance with the national government's mandate. Therefore, the estimated time frame on how long these recovery plans will be implemented is still uncertain and will probably take years. And for the last conclusion, Philippine Airlines has its own best practices during this COVID-19 pandemic. However, it cannot be denied that the Philippine Airlines also has its shortcomings and lacking in other strategies implemented. Philippine Airlines was compared into other selected international flag carriers around the world. The researchers noticed that there are similar strategies in terms of technologies used, policies implemented, and proposed recovery plans. But there are also some approaches that the Philippine Airlines could have adopted from other international airlines like the open lounges and more improved technologies that can be used for contactless transactions and tracing of passengers for their convenience and safety. For the recommendation to the airline company, the airline should consider reopening their lounges for the convenience of the passengers during their stay at the airport. As most international airlines have reopened, some did not stop operating their lounges but with certain measures such as lesser contact to the area surfaces, frequent disinfecting, and sanitizing of the area. The airline should also consider collaborating with other local airlines, just like what Japan Airlines did, in order to expand their network and increase their revenue. Philippine Airlines should also include the specific standards regarding what face masks are only allowed during flights on their main website, same as what Cathay Pacific did, where they specified that masks with valves or any openings are not allowed and highlighted in their website. Cathay Pacific also requires the passengers to undergo COVID tests before and after the flights to assure that the passengers did not contract any virus during the flights. In light of Emirates' offer to their passengers of their free global coverage for COVID-19 related costs, Philippine Airlines should also take into consideration in implementing this kind of strategy to ensure their passengers that the airline is passionate into giving their best service to Philippine Airline passengers and to safeguard the passengers' travel with much confidence, since passengers' discouragement to travel is one of the main challenges that was experienced by the airline. For the recommendation to the government, the Philippine government should have specific and consistent policies to implement for it not to result in confusion and inconvenience between the airline and the passengers. The government should also consider the effectiveness of the policies before implementing it, like the mandatory use of face shields, which according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention are not effective at protecting us or the people around us from respiratory droplets. The government should guarantee that these policies serve a vital purpose not just for the safety of the people but also for their convenience. Moreover, the IATF must not complicate their definition of quarantine parameters or protocols and indicate the specific differences of the GCQ, ECQ, and MECQ. The governing bodies of the administration should also help the airlines in the Philippines in its recovery by lending money that would be used in its expenditures, as well as an aid in helping and protecting the airlines with regards to the law, for instance, by allowing airline companies to file for bankruptcy just to protect the assets of the airline company from being subdued by the creditors. The government could also help ease the public tension and to alleviate the blame that the airlines are receiving from the imposed restrictions and requirements given by the government to the airlines. To the traveling public, the researchers recommend making a habit of reading before booking and boarding a flight. Self-updating and reading travel advisories posted by the passenger's airline of choice would save time and will help them understand more and easier that conflicts such as flight cancellations and additional requirements are not imposed by the airlines alone. Rather, the airlines are only following what the government bodies are enforcing. Everyone is suffering and being inconvenienced by the pandemic, and yet everyone is doing their best, hence, everyone should be more understanding and respectful. And lastly, to the future researchers, they can expand the scope of the study and include other major airlines in the Philippines as the subject for their research and create comparisons between different airline companies. The research can also have more key respondents through interviewing other departments of the airline company that is involved in the operations. This research could serve as a fundamental basis for future researchers for them to have a groundwork on how Philippine Airlines coped up during the pandemic. The research can also be adopted into quantitative research through changes in the instruments in order to know the statistics behind the extent of the challenges faced and the effectiveness of the strategies and recovery plans that are implemented. The next slides are the references of the study, and that would be all. Thank you.